Welcome to Humanism Now, the podcast from the Central London Humanists. I'm your host, James Hodgson. This week, we will be discussing how do you know if you're a humanist? Does it matter if people identify as humanist? And what role should climate action take in humanist campaigning? Plus, we'll have our interview with the coordinator of Humanist Climate Action, Lori Marriott. So to discuss all of this and more, I'm delighted to be joined by two fellow committee members at the Central London Humanists, Katia and Mark. Welcome back to the show. And our icebreaker question this week for you both is, what is your favourite time of the day and why? So, Katia, I'll come to you first. Welcome back. And what's your favourite time of the day?
Hi, James. Thanks for having me back. I think my favourite time is really early in the morning when everything is still quite quiet and the day hasn't quite started yet. I'm an early riser. It's kind of the moment when I can really just reflect and not on something specifically. I do that a bit later in the day, but I just let my mind drift. And it allows me to kind of recap what has happened, think about, what it means, and have an easy kind of start to the day. It can be a little bit nerve-wracking, but most of the time it's quite positive. But it has to be when the phone isn't yet ringing, when you're not expected to be anywhere yet.
Fantastic. And Mark, welcome back again. And same question to you. What's your favourite time of the day?
Yeah, hi, James, and thanks for having me back. Looking forward to this. I actually like mid-morning, so I'm sort of sequentially following on from Katia, because I'm not particularly good at the very beginning of the day. It takes me a little while to get going, and by mid-morning I've sort of done all the necessary tasks, and I often sort of get my early morning admin out of the way as well, checking emails and stuff. So by mid-morning I feel I've got everything I needed to do but didn't necessarily want to do done, and now I'm ready. It's still plenty of the day left, and so I'm looking forward to what comes up.
Yeah, it seems there's a common theme there. It's when is the best time to reflect and think. So I think for me, one of my favourite things is to go for a morning walk as soon as I wake up. So if I can time that with sunrise, I do find that a great time to plan the day, and similarly be alone with my thoughts and try to start the day as we need to go on. So thank you very much for that. Now, our main theme this week comes from a couple of conversations which I've had recently, where I've been discussing both involvement with the Central London group and running this podcast, where people I've met have said that they're familiar with humanism, they understand all of the main values and beliefs, and they respect and agree with them all, but they don't necessarily feel that they should identify with the label being humanist. So I thought this was an interesting discussion to have, particularly with two fellow members of the committee here, really around, is it important to identify with the term? When did we, as members of the committee, realise that we were humanist or decide that we were humanist? As a sort of opening question, Katia, how and when did you realise that you were a humanist?
This is a question I've been asked, and I ask this of other people as well, because you get to know them quite a bit from the answer. So it's not a particularly short answer. I didn't know much about humanism before I came to London, to the UK. I'd lived in Mexico and the US and in France. So when I came to the UK, to London, I didn't know many people. I wasn't looking for a humanist group particularly. I was actually looking for a book group. I wanted a non-fiction book group. And so I went along to the Central London Humanist Book Group. Later, I found out that it was a humanist, that it was organized by humanists. I got to know the people in the group, found them friendly, found myself being like-minded with them. So it was through spending time, socializing, meeting humanists, that I realized that we shared a lot. And therefore, I was also a humanist. We would meet to talk about books. Then, I started organizing theater, all that kind of topics where we would share, socialize over, made me realize that we shared the same, not exactly the same values, because it doesn't have to be a perfect fit, in my opinion, but enough that I wanted to spend more time with them. And eventually I wanted to help, and I wanted to be on the side of the people organizing the events so that there would be more events like the ones that had allowed me to find this fabulous group of people. So I joined the committee. But so it was kind of a almost by chance that I learned about humanism. And then, as soon as I was offered a place on the committee, I took it.
I think that's interesting. Yeah, this idea of shared activities can often lead to realization of shared values, and really we're talking about a sense of belonging and community here as well. So yes, I think whilst people can agree with the values, it's whether you actually want to socialize and be part of an active group, I think makes a big difference. Mark, how about for you? When did you first realize that you identified with the humanist label?
Yes, just to quickly comment on what Katia said, I think that's a really great point about you don't have to sort of come to humanism from a sort of a philosophical point of perspective. Our group is a community group that runs social and educational events, and anybody can come along and find out, sort of almost by osmosis whether or not humanism is for you. So I just thought that was a really great point. For me, it was a little bit different in that I think I always knew I knew what my values were, in terms of not being religious, being non-religious all my life, and also being a secularist as well, wanting to see a more secular society, and also having broadly progressive values. And I'd always found that the sort of the main outlet for those sorts of values would be political parties. But the problem I have with that is they can be, divisive and toxic, and there's a focus on getting elected, which drives a lot of negatives within the political sphere. So whereas something more values based. So when I sort of came across humanism, which I think was probably around about the early 2000s, I immediately thought, well, here is something that reflects my values, but isn't party political, isn't divisive, is much more of a unifying sort of foundational force. So yeah, that was what really drew me to it. And when I first became aware of it, this was quite a long time ago. This was in probably about 2005. There was an early iteration of this group, Central London Humanists, before we became what we are now, a sort of really large group. So I went to some of their events, including a really interesting talk by Stuart Lee, the comedian, who was talking about Jerry Springer the musical and how he'd written I think it's called the libretto for that. And then I disengaged for quite a long time. But that was really how I first got involved. And then more recently, my involvement with this group sort of resumed through doing the One Life course, which was organised by this group, and I think Katia was probably involved in the first running of that. I know Damien was, and that was a really good introduction to me, and I sort of learned more about what humanism really was as well through doing that.
I think that's definitely true. A lot of people discover what humanism is potentially sometime before they fully sign up to saying, yes, that's what I am. And I think because we're not a group that's known for evangelizing necessarily and trying to convert people, that it can tend to be more of a slow process. And I guess that point about it's very important not for us to be too academic. I think we can sometimes humanism can sometimes be quite an academic pursuit, but actually it is about the social elements as well, the type of people that you want to socialize with. And I think that is important in the types of events which we run as well for any other local groups, to really have a mixture of the events. As you say, some people find it through the book group, some through the talks and the socials. And we definitely see in our community that there are different pockets of the membership that like to come along to each series of events. And that's how we've managed to grow the community, I think. I guess one of the things that came out in the conversations that I was having was this idea of whether there is a set list of beliefs that people would have to subscribe to or sign up to if they were to say, yes, I am a humanist. And I think that's where there can be the final hurdle of hesitation of saying, well, I don't necessarily want to sign up to something. And I know, Mark, for you said, obviously, this is not a political movement. And of course, we're known for not having dogma. But do you think there are any beliefs that we would expect of fellow members of the group if they were to say, I am a humanist?
Yes, so I think that this is a really interesting question, because I think that in a sort of non-party sense, humanism is quite a liberal movement, and it tends to be quite tolerant, non-dogmatic, and very open-minded. And so I think in a way there's a crisis in liberalism, in a sense that by not being, if we're so non-dogmatic and so non-assertive in our views, we almost sort of stand aside and allow others to to trample over us. But so I think that quite a lot of people do have that issue where they don't. Then it's almost like humanists are instinctively non-joiners. So, but I personally think there are some things, some fundamental values that are important to humanists, and you sort of, if you don't believe in those things, then you probably aren't a humanist. So I think being rational and open-minded, being non-dogmatic, being trusting in science as the way to analyse and assess their understanding of the natural world and public policy making. But at the same time, also we are a kind and compassionate and inclusive group of people as well. And I think we believe that is foundational and important, very important. I think also in reality, I have yet to meet a humanist who isn't either an atheist or an agnostic. I think some people will be sort of thinking about these issues and have sort of mixed views. So I'd put that under the badge of agnosticism, but I don't meet many people who are both humanists and devoutly religious. So in reality, in practice, I think that tends to be the tendency.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's more about, in practice, these are the beliefs that people hold, rather than anything that is, as you say, prescribed, perhaps. But I think we might have an issue in telling people that we expect them to be non-dogmatic. There might be a slight contradiction there. Yeah. Is there anything that you would add, Katia?
I think that was quite complete from Mark. I do think that there are, it's more tendencies than criteria. So we tend to be more evidence-based. I guess the only thing that I would add is when I meet a fellow humanist, I will have higher expectations vis-a-vis their rationality, vis-a-vis their compassion, right? So I don't know if that's a belief that I expect a humanist to have, but it is my, and some people might not think that that's fair, but I do have higher expectations. And I think in a sense that's fair. I believe that humanists are people who have stopped to think about certain things. They tend to be non-religious, agnostic, or actually downright atheists because they've had a thought. They've said, oh, is religion really the thing that is going to help us be better people? And if they've come to the same answer as I have, I think we're better when we think for ourselves and when we accept dogma from a religion or even a political party. So this having higher expectations is linked for me to the fact that we are free thinkers. I think free thinkers in general can even explain themselves better. We are just as rational as anyone else, just as smart, very often just as informed. But we have asked certain questions and come to certain answers. So, for instance, on God and religion, on science and its value to us. I guess that's the only thing I would add.
I think that's a really interesting point, important point as well. In the conversations I had that inspired us having this discussion today, that was one of the questions that came up actually. Well, why is it different than just saying you're agnostic or being atheist, or is it the same as those things? And I think that thoughtfulness is the key difference there. I think a lot of people might nominally be agnostic or maybe have come to the conclusion that they're atheist, but it's in the thinking about the role that religion plays, or thinking about the role of science, and in particular the big ethical questions that mean that somebody might say, well, actually, no, I positively identify with being a humanist, rather than just saying, I don't know about these big questions. And I totally agree with your point in terms of holding members of the group to a higher standard as well. And I think it's also important to remember that if you are going to be, openly, presenting and identifying with a label, then try and be a good representative of that label as well, and try and also hold yourself to a higher standard so that you're reflecting positively for anybody who's finding out about whether it be humanism or something else for the first time. Mark, did you have something to add?
Yeah, this is something that came up quite recently, actually, when I was talking about humanism, explaining it to somebody I know very well. And they actually sort of very much in tune with what you were both just saying, was that, but at a slightly different angle, is that they had a concern that any group that sort of set itself up as, or sort of tried to champion a set of moral standards, explicit moral standards, which I think is to some extent part of humanism, or certainly very heavily implied, that was in a sense for them raising a bit of a red flag, because there was a concern about sort of people being pious and sanctimonious, and that very often the sort of people, we've seen this with, say, certain religious groups where people will hold certain moral principles in public, but in private be practicing the opposite, and the sort of hypocrisy that can come with that. So I notice a general tendency amongst humanists to be quite wary of stepping down too hard on in terms of sort of moral injunctions, and that we're quite cautious about that, and probably rightly so. But that's not to say that there aren't certain moral principles that we at least try to adhere to.
Definitely. I think I would agree with your friend there. I think any group defining themselves as more rational or more ethical is on the road towards righteousness, which I'm a big fan of Jonathan Haidt's Righteous Mind, and I think you can see that anywhere. And I think, if we were to define ourselves as more righteous, that becomes problematic quite quickly. If you look at the definition of what a humanist is in the Humanist International briefing, there's 4 points there, but one word is repeated quite often, which is strive. It's that humanists strive to be rational and we strive to be ethical. And I think that's a really important distinction, rather than saying that we are. And to Katia's point, it means you can also hold people to those standards and sort of ask, if you do disagree with someone, ask, are they at least striving to consider all of the evidence, or aiming to be rational, even if we have different ways of coming to the, even if we come to different conclusions and perhaps have different ways of getting there, are we following those principles? So I think that's really important to bear in mind as well, and to hold ourselves to those standards. And so I guess the final question on this point is, does this matter? Do we care if people who maybe share our values also want to identify with the humanist term? Katia, as someone who kind of came to this, as you say, via a different route, what do you think?
Humanism can be a label. And I would say that because it is a label, it is going to be cultural in a big sense, in an important sense. So I would say no. I can say that I didn't identify as a humanist for most of my life, whilst holding broadly the same beliefs as I do now, that I am a humanist. So, in my case, it's easy to explain. I didn't grow up in the UK. I grew up in Mexico, the US, and I spent a lot of time in France. And these are not places where humanism is that big. It's not as present in everyday life as it is in the UK. That doesn't mean that people in those countries don't have the same beliefs and wouldn't identify as humanists were they, for instance, living in the UK. I can share what some conversations that I've just very recently had in France with some friends in France who would not call themselves humanists at all. For them, being an atheist is quite just a matter of fact. It's not something that has to be, politicized or campaigned for in any way in France. There is a little bit of an issue now in France with the laïcité, with the laws. But for everyday people, most of them have been brought up atheist. They would talk about issues, they would be more political, I find. about certain issues. So, for instance, the words that are used. So, in the UK, for instance, you hear a lot the cost of living crisis, right? In France, you would hear on both sides of the center. So I see most politicians in France being on the left or the right of a center. And they would talk about things like social justice and why, housing has to be better for schools, for teachers, for nurses, etc., because of social justice. And this is said on the radio by someone who identifies themselves as being on the right of center. So the humanist issues of compassion are very widespread across countries that don't then say, well, if you're compassionate, you're a humanist. They would say, well, if you're compassionate, you're a socialist, perhaps. Or they would say, if you are an atheist, well, then you're in favor of laïcité. But even if you're religious, you can be in favor of secularism. In France, even religious people are in favor, most religious people are in favor of secularism. They don't have to label themselves anything other than secularists. And that is a very Republican thing to be. And you can be on the right or on the left of the center. I just think that the label doesn't matter as much.
Mark, how about for you? Do you think it's good for more people to identify, openly as being humanist?
Yes, I'm going to flip my answer around and address the political, broader issues first, because in response to the really interesting point that Katia made that I hadn't really thought of. So I think that in a social sense, in a societal sense, actually there is a value in people identifying as humanist in our setting, because unlike France, we're not a secular republic, we're a theocratic monarchy, frankly, and the church is extremely powerful here. Look at the number of religious faith schools. We all know about bishops in the House of Lords. We're still, as a society which is actually quite non-religious, we are formally, dominated, but sort of our society and politics are very influenced by religion. So actually, if you want to see a more secular society, then that's not going to happen by accident. It's going to mean people actually taking some sort of action. And being a humanist, actually, politics is a numbers game, isn't it? It's about whether it's people expressing their views or the way they vote or the amount of money they put forward. That's what determines what happens in the social sphere, so in the political sphere. So if we want to see a more secular society, then being an open humanist and supporting humanist causes is one way to achieve that. And so I think in that sense, on a more personal level, I don't think it matters as much if people want to, the way they choose to live their lives, the label they want to give themselves. If they have good values and they are, they take an approach to understanding the natural world based on science and reason rather than superstition and dogma, then that's what I don't really care what they call themselves. I think it does help personally to have. It can help to have a label if you're looking to sort of, almost give yourself a sense of boundaries, and if it help, if you're the type of person who likes to have something that you can really identify with it psychologically, and I find it is useful to have a bit of a label, and to also to have a community which helps me reinforce those ideas and values. And I think an example would actually be for me is that I think I've become more interested in science as a consequence of being involved with humanism. I've read more books about popular science because it's part of the culture of humanism. So in fact, there's been a real benefit in actually in terms of my understanding of the world and things that I should really have read about a long time ago. So yeah, I think that it's a matter of personal choice, but I think there are certain benefits to being explicit about your humanist beliefs and values.
I do kind of struggle with whether we should be more political. Whether humanism should be more political, because I think that, as Mark has just said, politics is a number of games, and I feel there are many more humanists in a place like the UK that would be of value politically than are being used politically, and so many things have to change in the UK right now. We have these campaigns from Humanism UK. I think we'll talk about this when we come to the topic of climate action. Some of the things that we could help change are really important matters. So whilst I understand that we shouldn't go around evangelizing and that we're a social group and humanism isn't necessarily political, after spending a little bit of time in France, I've come back thinking, well, wait a minute, everything is political. Like even saying, oh, I'm not going to be political because if I go political, then these consequences. You often ask on the podcast, what have you changed your mind on recently? And I think I'm flip-flopping back and forth with, we should be more political. We shouldn't be political. I think we need to at least talk about it and maybe use the advantage of having a voice, of having a group that is big here in the UK to make changes.
Yeah, I think representation matters in a couple of different ways. I think one, that yes, the strength of your voice. If there are more people who identify with the group, then yes, you are more likely to be listened to. But I also think the way that I came to be comfortable identifying with the label was through a lot of like the Humanist UK patrons who were people that I'd found through other means, often scientists or comedians or writers, and you realize with the numbers of people that you like and you follow their work and you think they seem like a nice person and an interesting, thoughtful person, and then they mention it in an interview, oh, I'm a humanist, and they don't have to go into the details, but that for me was the way in which I felt comfortable with it. So I think the more people who are sort of openly identifying from a diverse range of backgrounds as well, diverse set of experiences, the more likely others are going to feel comfortable being open about their beliefs as well. So I think these are all important topics, but I agree that we shouldn't, demand it of people, but it is helpful, I think. So hopefully we can encourage more through this podcast as we go forward. Well, thank you very much, Katia and Mark, for your insights there. We will be back to review after this week's interview with Lori Marriott. Lori Marriott is the coordinator with Humanist Climate Action, a volunteer-led network of Humanist UK members and supporters committed to redefining lifestyles and campaigning for policies that promote low-carbon, ethical and sustainable living in the light of the degeneration of the Earth's climate and biodiversity. Lori Marriott, thank you very much for joining us on Humanism Now.
Hi, James. Thanks very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. Always keen, obviously, to be speaking about kind of environmental stuff and humanist stuff as well.
Perfect. Well, with that in mind, can you share with us your personal journey to humanism and joining Humanist UK and how that led into the particular focus on climate action?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's kind of a tale of two kind of streams of my interests coming together. So back when I was at university, which is probably about 2007, 2008, I saw an event advertised, and it was actually Andrew Copson was coming to speak and kind of tell people about humanism, what it was. He's obviously chief exec of Humanist UK now. That was quite a while ago, so it just shows how long he's kind of been involved in humanism. Yeah, I heard him speak. I was really inspired. It felt like coming home, if I can kind of use that phrase. And it just, really made me realize this is for me. I'm a humanist. These are all my values. This is kind of exactly what I believe. All the people that I speak to who are humanists, we don't always necessarily 100% agree, but, I feel like we have the connection and kind of understand each other. So at the same time, at university, I was also becoming interested and active in environmental campaigning, as quite a lot of people do. So there were those kind of two streams that running alongside each other. And they started to come together when I actually, after I'd left uni, kind of got a job, had a little bit of disposable income. So I actually joined what was then the British Humanist Association at a Green Party conference. So it was those two things kind of starting to come together. Meanwhile, I think the British Humanist Association decided to join the Stop Climate Chaos Coalition. And then out of that decision grew a group called Humanists for a Better World, who were kind of had a bit of a broader remit, as the name might suggest, but were obviously kind of, getting involved in that side of things, in climate campaigning and so on. And then out of that evolved Humanist Climate Action, which was actually launched during the pandemic. So when I saw that Humanist UK was kind of, putting together this group and focusing more on climate action, I knew that I definitely wanted to be involved in that. So they kind of put the call out for members and a coordinator. And I applied for that role. I think that was during the pandemic, so it must have been about 3 years ago or something like that. Humanist Climate Action, there's about kind of 9 or 10 of us, so we're all volunteers, which, a lot of people have day jobs, so we do kind of try our best, giving our time and so on. It just makes sense to me to kind of bring my humanism and my interest and passion for the climate and those two things together.
Are you also looking for more volunteers?
I think we're always looking for help, certainly. There are a kind of set number of people that are allowed to be on the committee. We have actually just hired someone to focus on social media, which was we definitely needed a bit of help on. I'm not particularly kind of social media savvy myself in any way, so we definitely needed a bit on that, and we're hoping to kind of reach more people by posting more and kind of being more visible on social media in that way. We've also just hired someone to kind of focus on Northern Ireland and someone to focus on Wales as well. So again, we can kind of maybe reach and focus on those kind of regions a bit more. We're always looking for supporters, and I'm sure I can tell you later how people can get involved a bit more.
Absolutely, yeah, and we'll definitely include all the links in the show notes for sure. And thank you very much for your story and background to this point, and how it seemed like a natural fit. In your opinion, do you think that climate action now should be a central feature for anyone who holds humanist values?
Yeah, I really, really do. Absolutely. Kind of 100%. It comes from what I've just said, really, that it's just natural in my mind for those two things kind of to go together. So let me tell you kind of, I think, the two key reasons why. One is that for me, a massive part or a key tenet of humanism is empathy. So whether that's empathy for kind of those around us in our immediate social circles, whether it's going wider to the societies we live in, but also like to other countries, all around the world, to kind of all humans. But you can also extend that even further to animals, to all life that kind of exists on the planet. And then also forward in time, so to future generations, both of humans and other animals that live on this planet. So if we think about kind of that empathy, and then we think about how how humans specifically are using the planetary resource we have at the rate we are, how we're kind of destroying biodiversity around the world, and generally just behaving, like our actions aren't really affecting our environment. Those two things aren't compatible, that empathy and kind of those actions and behavior. And empathy for me, it's quite a strong foundation for ethical behavior. So I think when you are holding those values, if you want to act those out in your life and the way you live, but also in how society is organized, to make those two things compatible, I do feel that kind of respecting the planet all needs to be kind of part of the same thing. Secondly, this might almost come across a bit spiritual in a way, but I feel a very deep connection to the natural world. I have, since I was a child, and also an absolute kind of fascination with the way that science can explain, the complex web of life around us. Obviously we all know about kind of Darwin and all that kind of thing. And for me, that appreciation and awe is actually enhanced by the knowledge that, all these things, all these connections were formed over eons by evolution rather than by a creator. So that's actually, a wondrous thing to me. So I see human beings as part of this complex system. But then I also see that we're not respecting the balance of that system. So we're behaving as if we're outside it, even though we are a part of it. So we are treating the earth as if it's not kind of the only one. And without the belief that actually, someone or something's going to drop in and save us, which I don't obviously believe there are, and that it's just this one life I have, just this one life we have, just this one planet, that really convinces me that we actually need to take responsibility for our actions and our activities as a species as a whole. But I mean, what do you think, James? Would you kind of agree with that? Have you got how do you see it kind of sitting with your humanist values?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, that definitely resonates with me completely. I think what I would add is to draw on the very last point you made there about responsibility. I think, as you mentioned, rather than accepting that we are of the natural world, or even of the universe, if you want to go even further back in time, and we're made of these natural causes and elements, is not to shirk our responsibility. I think the fact that we have developed to be aware of where we came from and aware of our surroundings, but also develop the awareness of our impact on our environment, means that we have a huge responsibility, not just to the planet as it is, but I think to future generations as well. I think we've been given this incredible opportunity, or have developed this incredible opportunity, I guess, as a species that is so aware and can achieve such amazing things. One of my driving factors is that we're able to flourish as much as possible in the future and maximize human potential. And core to that is preserving the only environment we know that can sustain us. So I do feel as though in a way we have a special place because we have that awareness and those capabilities to have a change, to have an impact on the environment. So yes, it definitely speaks to me. And I'm sure almost all of our members and listeners would be supportive of the cause. But I guess it comes down to action. Yep. And so I'm interested, a couple of questions really. I'd love to come on to the actions that you're taking now and what you've got planned in the future. But I'm also curious to know, do you ever encounter objections, counterpoints from fellow humanists who say this is not our priority, or this is not in line with humanist values at the moment? Has that been conversations that you've had?
Yeah, so there's a couple of angles there. One is obviously Humanist UK kind of has several campaigning priorities, which we all support, things like legalising humanist marriage, legalising assisted dying. On the face of it, those are obviously kind of a bit divorced maybe from environmental concerns. They're not necessarily kind of intertwined. They are kind of more about social, ethical issues. So Humanist UK, has its own priorities as well. And I think sometimes those are maybe, in conflict with other religious groups that might have different opinions, whereas some of the environmental things maybe are like more of an opportunity for interfaith cooperation as well. So I think sometimes people that are humanists maybe just have slightly different priorities, and it's not necessarily that they wouldn't, support us or make ethical or kind of greener choices in their everyday lives or anything like that. It's just maybe that they think Humanist UK, has specific priorities that they should be focusing on, which, absolutely fair enough. I think we need to try and bring everybody with us in general. So everything that we can do to kind of convince people to support in any way, it is always going to be a positive thing as well. Also, the other thing I was going to say, I just remembered, the other angle is that we get the question quite often, do we support groups like Extinction Rebellion? Do we support, kind of the Just Stop Oil type approach of, blocking roads or throwing paint on the, paintings in art galleries and things like that? Obviously, as a branch of a charity, we would, we have to be very firm. We'd never encourage anyone to break the law in any way. At the same time, we recognise that there are different ways to be an environmental activist. And I think that's something that I've been thinking about recently, is that almost anything can be an act of activism, if that makes sense. So even if you're painting a painting and putting it up in your window, and that's inspiring someone that's walking past to think or something, that's still an act of activism. So really small things can actually kind of, be that way. I think, there's probably quite an overlap in terms of membership of supporters of Humanist Climate Action and groups like Extinction Rebellion. And we did join one of their protests it must have been last year because it was last March, because they'd actually taken kind of changed their stance slightly. So it was a very family-friendly protest, and it was, a very kind of non-violent, just direct action kind of march, completely legal, were just lots of different groups coming together. So there were lots of different faith groups there, and all different environmental NGOs, organisations, community organisations. It was almost just like a big party, to be honest. We were there on the Biodiversity Day. Everyone was, well, not everyone, but lots of people were dressed up in animal costumes and masks and things like that. So it was almost just kind of a very, festive atmosphere. So I think, it is an ongoing discussion in society about how we protest, how we're allowed to protest, and the impact that different kinds of protest and activism can have. So I think that's a really interesting question. It is one that comes up. But again, just to repeat, we would obviously never encourage anyone to break the law while doing anything to do with kind of humanist climate action.
Absolutely, yeah, and I really think this can't be a polarized political topic anymore that people want to make it, right? And yes, we can be aligned on the overall message and outcomes of the campaigns, but we don't have to support everybody's methods. And I think that's the thing. You don't have to support someone 100%. Say, we can agree on and campaign in the same direction. Definitely, yeah. And it's great to hear that this is also in many occasions an interfaith campaign as well. And again, this is something that we can all come together and align on. Talk us through some of the activities that you're involved in, and also in your experience, what have been the most impactful way that your Humanist Climate Action or individuals or community groups like ours can align and have a real world impact?
Sure. So some of the work that Humanist Climate Action does is kind of government facing, I guess you'd say. So when the government's releasing consultations or select committee inquiries on anything that we feel we can contribute to, we're kind of making responses to those, making sure that the humanist voice is heard. So for example, the government are, I have to say, quite slowly banning plastic packaging. So they're almost consulting item by item. So, for example, there was a consultation on plastic cutlery. I think there was another one on kind of takeaway boxes. So it's a bit of a drawn out process. But, there's different things to take into account there, like how quickly those should happen. What should the alternative be? Obviously, you need to make sure the alternative is actually still a more sustainable version than the plastic kind of one was. So it's different things like that that we've contributed to, some kind of larger ones as well to do with biodiversity targets and things like that. So those are just kind of obviously ad hoc. When they come up, we try to respond and make sure that the humanist voice is kind of being heard and supporting kind of the best possible actions in those areas. We're also obviously trying to encourage humanists themselves to live as sustainable lives as possible. I mean, I just want to, preface this bit by saying we have been living in a cost of living crisis, and sometimes making sustainable choices in what you buy or what you do, it can be more expensive. So I think we always need to keep that in mind when we're talking about this, because what people are able to do with their individual lifestyles is very variable. So we always kind of need to make sure we're kind of saying that, rather than just expecting everyone, to instantly buy an electric car or something like that. I think there are lots of small shifts that people can make. It's the obvious stuff. I'm sure you and the listeners have heard it all before. It's eating less meat. It's trying to buy kind of locally sourced food and goods, using public transport, swapping to cycling or walking for the short journeys where you can, cutting down on flying where you can. But one thing I did want to talk about, which is actually one of the most impactful things that you can do, it's not too difficult, and it potentially won't actually cost you anything, and that is looking at where your money is. So who do you bank with? What's their investment policy? Where is your money? Where are your savings? What are they being invested in? And importantly, where is your pension? So hopefully you have one. Where is it? So there's some research to show that actually switching to a greener pension can have the same impact on your personal carbon footprint as stopping flying. And wow. You can change your pension almost at the click of a button. There are quite a few options nowadays. So there's everything from pensions that just kind of state that they don't invest in fossil fuels, And then there's ones that are kind of actively supporting green investment and innovation and kind of green businesses around the world as well. So it does require a little bit of research, and obviously just a little disclaimer, it's important for everyone to do their own research and to make financial choices that are right for them. But it is something that can have quite an impact, because as well, kind of once you've made that decision, it's kind of just ticking away in the background. So it's not something, it's almost a one-off. You don't need to actively, do it or think about it. How many people kind of think about their pension on a day-to-day basis? It's just kind of something that you can do, and then you know that your money, is actually being invested in things that aren't detrimental to the planet. So, it's quite an interesting one that isn't talked about so much as well.
And I guess that's a good way of almost consumer activism as well. If you are choosing where you spend your money, and it's definitely the case that there's a lot of greenwashing out there. So thorough research is required in terms of how green a green
definitely.
fund actually is. That's how a lot of people, individuals can have an impact.
Exactly, yeah. And have an impact on the larger corporate world as well, I think, because the more people that are making that choice, eventually the more kind of companies and businesses that will catch on and be like, oh, actually, we need to have this as an option. So then the more options there will be for consumers as well.
Yeah, because my thought as you were talking was, what's the balance between top-down versus bottom-up change? I think a lot of pressure is sometimes put on us as individuals to change our lifestyles, which, as you say, during the cost of living crisis is becoming more and more difficult, challenging, rather than, actually this just being driven by either the regulators, the governments, or the big corporations themselves. But I guess this is another way to put pressure on corporations to change their practices.
Yeah, money does speak.
Have you read Hannah Ritchie's book, Not the End of the World, as well? That was
no, I'll write that one down.
That's a good one I can recommend to listeners as well, for with lots of small tips and a lot of focus on a point you mentioned about particularly red meats, whether if you do eat meat, where is it sourced from? And effectively cutting down on beef and lamb can have a huge environmental impact. So all of these things, it's just useful to know. And again, there's a lot of contradictory information that I think is out there as well. We're living in an age of, where there's so much contradictory facts, alternative facts, disinformation, misinformation, which is being circulated online. Unfortunately, something as scientifically proven as climate change is getting caught up in this storm of differences of opinion. How do you combat, both personally or through Humanist Climate Action, how do you combat misinformation, I guess climate deniers?
A couple of years ago, I almost would have said almost past the point of climate deniers, at least in this country. But I'm not sure if that's kind of been a bit of a resurgence recently. I think it is really tough because much of kind of misinformation and disinformation takes place on social media, which it's just, it's too large of an arena to police or to, for anyone really to interact with it in that way, to, start Twitter arguments or X arguments, however you want to say, about a piece of misinformation or a claim. And then you've got, the addition of AI writing articles. You can, kind of just ask an AI bot to kind of write an article with a headline that's going to be a bit of clickbait or something to kind of suck people in so they're clicking on things. So, it's a bit of a wild west out there, I'm not going to lie. On Humanist Climate Action, what we do is just basically make sure that we are sticking to the science ourselves. So we regularly kind of review our terms of reference to make sure anything that we're promoting, all our kind of objectives are completely aligned with the scientific consensus. And then just in general, and I think this holds true for anything you're reading or any issue that you feel yourself forming an opinion about, you might say, is just to always encourage people to look beyond the headline, to look beyond the claim, to go back to the source of the information, whether that's a scientific study, whether that's, a journalist that's picked up something from a political speech, whatever it might be. Just always kind of go back to the source of the information and think about, why is this person saying this? What's the validity of the claim? And, just try and be as rational as possible and assess the information before you actually form an opinion about it. And I know that's quite difficult, and it's quite a lot to ask for everyone, to do that for everything that you see on the internet or, while you're scrolling through social media. So I think just really encouraging people to be skeptical, although maybe not to the point of kind of conspiracy. That's obviously the kind of the other end of extreme skepticism, is then like, oh, none of this is true. So it can kind of go too far, but it is a really difficult arena. And I think it's something that actually as a society as a whole, we do need to be thinking about more and dealing with more. So for example, the online safety bill went through Parliament last year. And that's really the first major piece of regulation that there's been. And it's the year, that was the year 2023. And social media has been around for much longer than that. So we really are kind of behind the times. And also by the time you regulate, it's already changed. So it's a very difficult area. And I just think we really need to be encouraging people to be skeptical, to be rational, to look at the evidence, and making sure that way of thinking is embedded in education as well, so that children are really just taught to focus on those kind of those ways of thinking and those ways of looking at information.
I mean, it's a constant struggle for all of us, as you mentioned. You really can't dig into every single headline that you read and fully go through that process. So yeah, it's I guess we also need to encourage better journalism in that respect as well, a more of a science-based approach throughout society. And I think that is being encouraged as well for the next generation. Looking ahead towards the future, what is Humanist Climate Action's main goals and upcoming projects for the year?
So one of the main things we are working on at the moment, which is a really great opportunity for anyone that wants to get involved, is called the Great Big Green Week. So that's something that happens every year. And this year, it just so happens, last year as well, it happens to coincide with the Humanist UK Convention. So that's quite handy for us, again, to kind of align those two things. So this year's theme for the Great Big Green Week is Let's Swap Together for Good. So the good thing about that theme is it can kind of be interpreted in lots of different ways. So you can take it quite literally. So, instead of buying something new, you could be swapping something with your neighbour or someone in your community or family member. But you can take it more generally, and this is what we'll be doing at convention. And in general, we'll be encouraging humanists to make a pledge to swap something in your life for a more environmentally friendly alternative. So yeah, there's loads of different ways that you could do this. It could be a bit more esoteric, kind of swapping knowledge or skills with someone. You could be, going back to the things we spoke about before, you could swap out a meal a week where you usually eat meat for a veggie alternative. You could organise a clothes swap with your friends. You could swap out one of your usual activities for something else, like a litter pick or a nature hike or something like that. So the Great Big Green Week website has loads of resources and ideas. It's taking place in June. So I really encourage people to go and look at their website as well if you wanted to kind of set something up in your local community. And you can kind of register your event on there and see what other people are up to. Lots of schools get involved, lots of other kind of community groups. So that should be good. At convention itself, we're going to have the Humanist Convention, that is, we're going to have a stall there and encourage people to come along to be making their pledges, kind of maybe get their picture taken with their pledge, things like that. So that should be good. That's kind of our main focus coming up. And then a bit later this year, another thing that we're hoping to do, and hopefully this podcast is the start of this as well, is to engage more with local humanist groups. So we think there are lots of opportunities for local groups to be getting involved, both with us, but also with kind of your local areas, local projects, local environmental campaigning. So the thing that we're going to be doing over the coming months is looking at how Humanist Climate Action can actually kind of support local groups in doing that.
That's great. And I think that leads on nicely to wrap up. If our listeners are part of a local group, or they as individuals would like to get involved, what can they do, and what's the best way to contact you?
Sure, yes. So one main thing to do is to sign up for our newsletter, which you can do via the Humanist UK website, and then you just kind of need to find the Humanist Climate Action section on the website. If you sign up for our newsletter, it's once every 2 months. We have all kinds of exciting things in it. So we've got interviews with humanists, some of which are patrons of Humanist UK. We've got actions that you can take, kind of updates on campaigns. Sometimes we might have kind of a book review. They try to encourage engagement as well. So people that kind of respond to any of the articles, we put responses in and get a bit of kind of conversation going. You could also follow us on social media, so Instagram and X/Twitter, and just watch out for any kind of forthcoming campaigns and actions that we have coming up as well. As I mentioned, we're hoping to work with local groups more, so you might actually just get kind of an email from us popping into your local group inbox later in the year anyway. There's also an email address, so that's climateaction@humanist.uk. And finally, if you are coming to the Humanist UK convention in Cardiff, please do just drop by the stall, because we're very keen to chat to people, really.
Fantastic. Well, we look forward to seeing you there and hope to hear more from Humanist Climate Action at many of our local groups very soon. So, Lori, thank you very much for your time. Before we go, our standard closing question: what's something you've changed your mind on recently?
So I've got two things. One is more serious and related to this podcast, one less so. I did recently change my pension, as I discussed during the podcast. So I did my research, made the decision, and I did switch my pension over to a kind of a greener one, which invests in things that I approve of rather than disapprove of. So that's one thing. And the other one was, I don't know if you remember Avril Lavigne, the singer. I've been listening to a podcast because there's a conspiracy theory about whether she was replaced, that she died and was replaced at some point. And I've kept changing my mind about whether I agree. But I think I've come down on the side of, I think Avril Lavigne is Avril Lavigne, and that the evidence is on the side that she has not been replaced. But I haven't finished the podcast yet, so I might change my mind again. You never know.
I thought that was going to be our first ever admission of someone believing in a conspiracy theory on the Humanism Now podcast. We'll have to wait until the end of the series to find out. But Lori Marriott, exactly. Thank you for everything you're doing at Humanist Climate Action. Such an important cause. Very much looking forward to hearing more from you throughout the year. And thank you for joining us on Humanism Now.
Thanks so much, James.
Welcome back to Humanism Now, and thank you to Lori for that incredibly insightful interview. She's really doing fantastic work with Humanist Climate Action. And of course, we will include links to all of their campaigns if anybody listening would like to get involved. So we also welcome Lori on with some fellow leaders in the movement for our Earth Day talk a couple of weeks ago. So we've had lots of learnings here at Central London Humanists on how we can be more involved in climate action. So I wonder, reflecting on the interview, Mark, what was your main takeaway? Do you see climate action as a central issue for humanistic values?
I do, actually, yes. I think it's. I think there's a number of reasons why it sort of holds that position. I think that in the first instance, philosophically, scientifically, it's completely aligned with our positions and stances. It's a science-based view of understanding the natural world, and as I've mentioned a few times. But it's also very much concerned about the well-being of humanity and indeed all sentient beings in the world. So, I think as humanists, we care about human flourishing and about we want to protect the natural world. We have respect for that because we have a certain awe and delight in understanding and appreciating that the wonders of nature as well as some of the terrors. So yes, and the other thing is obviously it is objectively a really pressing issue that we can't put off. We have to address it now. So even if there were other sort of factors that are influencing our view, the fact that it's such a pressing crisis means that everybody has to be talking about it, and Humanism UK is very much talking about it, and hence the fact that they have this sort of subgroup which is devoted to that. So I think it's really important.
Yeah, for the reasons that Mark has just given, the fact that the science on it is now so strong, we need to, and this would also go back to why I've slightly changed my mind on how political we could be or we should be. I'm not sure. I'm only just starting to kind of not ban myself from thinking about that. Environmentalism is a pressing issue, and whatever we can do, we should be doing. As a humanist, and even, with people who aren't necessarily humanists, everyone should be banding together. And she does talk about that a little bit in the interview, of how from different political parties, from different sides, even with religious people, you need to do all that you can to make this front and center, because all of the wonderful things that we can celebrate about being empathetic and about social justice can't happen if we don't get this crisis under control. My change there is that maybe it does need to be more political, so that more things happen, because just doing it not actively hasn't been enough. We can say that it's a priority, but are we actively making that priority have consequences? And are we active enough? Are we going to regret having been so moderate and having been so reasonable in a future, in a near future, actually? So yeah, I think the interview again got me thinking about what can we do, and as a group, maybe as humanists, I'm very excited to look at what campaigns she proposes and what we can participate in as humanists.
Yeah, there's definitely much more to come this year from Humanist Climate Action. I know they're rolling out many more programs and campaigns. So it's been great to work with Lori on that. And I think it's right. It came out in the interview and in the online discussion, which we hosted, is what is the right balance between, pressuring individuals for bottom up changes rather than, really pressuring governments for top down regulatory changes, which you would think would have a wider impact sooner. And I think it's good as well. One of the things we covered when we were speaking and also in the talk is that progress has been made. That it's not all doom and gloom. There are practical solutions. There are pragmatic approaches to this, and I think that's an important message as well that Humanist Climate Action seem to be promoting. But I agree your point, Katia, that we can't just be too nice and celebrate the small wins too much. We've got to, keep the emphasis and focus to drive the change. I guess just before we wrap up, was there anything you took away as practical takeaways for yourselves based on the interview? Katia, if I come to you first, what stood out for you in terms of direct changes that any of us can be making?
Yeah, there were a couple of really interesting points that she made. The really hard one is I completely agree that we have to go away and look at the science before we take a position on something. And generally, this is what, for me, part of humanism is being as informed as possible on the evidence that backs up a certain position. And for me, it's very important to be kind of on the right side of science when I take a certain position, and to be open to changing my mind when the evidence actually shows that, no, it wasn't A, it was actually B. It's a huge responsibility, however, because we don't have in our everyday life, we don't have the time to go research. I mean, if you try to Google some of the points about, she mentions eating local or consuming things that are local. That, yes, as a general principle, yes, but it's not that simple, because you can be growing tomatoes in the UK by using a huge amount of energy in greenhouse settings. Or you can say, just eat what's in season. Don't eat tomatoes before June. So it's complicated. She also mentioned investing in green funds, which I have personally looked into and have not found an easy answer to. There's a lot of greenwashing, which she admits, she talks about. And there's the fact that the amount of research you need to do to be certain that you've made the right choice, it's a lot of pressure to put on people. So I think we need to just very generally always strive for more ecological choices and stay tuned to people who can help us. And I think that would be the point for me of humanists having a climate action wing. They can go away and look at certain things and come back and present the data to the rest of us, so that we have a little bit of an advantage and not having to do all of the research all on our own all the time. And that doesn't mean that you're not then going to be responsible individually for the decision you make, but a help, I guess. So yeah, I find it very exciting that she's taking this on.
Links back to a conversation we had a couple of podcasts ago, actually, about science education and understanding. And this is an incredibly complex issue. As you say, the data is there. It's not necessarily clear, but of course, we'll accept that climate change is real and man-made, but actually how to best combat it. There are, lots of contradicting information. So it really does help to have a group of specialists who are looking at this that we can rely on, and we know are taking, a humanistic approach to solutions. Mark, how about for you? Was there anything that stood out as key takeaway from Lori's talk?
Yeah, so really interesting points that Katia raises, and I think this whole debate about the sort of the balance between individual action and collective governmental action, and very often we hear that actually, in reality, it's governments, it's top down, which is going to be the most important thing in terms of really making those changes, and even if it comes to actually informing our decisions, that we need experts. Much maligned group of people to tell us, what is the best way to act, even individually. So the two things are interconnected. I mean, I personally find that I think probably around about the time I became more explicit about being a humanist, or really embracing humanist values. About the same time, I sort of also became much more conscious about things like recycling and I think I've been influenced by certain things. We had a very interesting talk about sentientism with Jamie Woodhouse, didn't we? About several talks and interventions about that, and that really made me think also about eating less meat. I mean, I'm one of those terrible flexitarians. I haven't gone fully vegan, but I do predominantly a vegan diet, and that is partly to do with the environment as well as concern for sentient beings. So. Yeah, I think there's lots of things that one can do individually, but I think, yes, I take Katia's point about acting more collectively. I did like what she's talked about in terms of a number of things, but one thing that really stood out for me was around this Humanist Climate Action, actually reaching out to local humanist groups such as ourselves and others to try to coordinate and encourage activism there, and that also happens to just coincide with our own group getting more organised in that respect. As we know, we're going to be launching our own sort of more campaigns and volunteering wing. We've got some exciting developments happening there, so it's very good timing. And the person who's going to be leading for us on that new strand of activity is somebody who's very committed to environmental action. So it's there's a nice synergy there.
We've seen a general consensus that we should be doing more activism and campaigns within our group and within other local groups. So it's great that very well timed as well that Lori is trying to roll this out nationally. I think they're looking to do similar talks across the UK with other local groups. So if anybody again would like to be put in touch with Humanist Climate Action, please do let us know. We can certainly connect you, but we will include all of the links in the show notes. And with that, I think we've come to the end of our agenda for this week. So Katia, Mark, thank you both very much for your time. Just before we go, is there anything you would like to mention that you're currently working on, or we can flag to our listeners? Katia, I'll come to you first.
Well, it's not something from Central London Humanist. It's Humanist UK, a really easy event because you can join online. It's in conversation with Susie Allegre, Being Human in the Age of AI. I've read one of her books not the one that she's going to be talking about, I think, this time around. It's the previous one, which is, I think, Freedom to Think. A really great book that maybe I'll suggest we read in our book group. Let's join that up, and when we meet socially, we can discuss it. Maybe we can have a podcast session on freedom to think. I'm going to put it out there, James, if you want to take that up as a topic.
No,
but
absolutely.
I'm looking forward to that this month.
No, happy to. And I'm for video listeners, I'm showing here that Susie's new book, which is Human Rights, Robot Wrongs, Being Human in the Age of AI. She's a fantastic writer and incredibly well informed on these topics. So yes, would certainly recommend both books, and to join the In Conversation event, which is 15th of May, online discussion with Andrew Copson and Susie Allegra. Will certainly be there. And Mark, thanks again for joining us. And anything you'd like to flag either from CLH or otherwise?
Yeah, I think it's fascinating to see the curtain lifted on the planning process for future podcasts happening live and on air. It's very transparent.
I think Katia's hacked the system. If you just mention it and it gets published, then
exactly.
You have to commit to it.
So a couple of things. One is that we have an upcoming discussion in our online discussion group about housing and the housing crisis, which is going to be led by the wonderful Audrey Simmons. So that's going to be a really interesting discussion. And I didn't realise this before, but there was actually a Humanist Housing Association at one point. So it's something, an issue that humanists have been really interested in for a long time. It's very pertinent now. The other thing is I did mention that I attended this thing called the One Life course a few years ago during lockdown, and that's how I got re-involved with this group. And it also gave me really interesting insights into what humanism is. And so that's really our, introduction to humanism course. It's called the One Life course, but it's a what is humanism course really, and it's a 6-parter, 1.5 hours each, and it's going to run over a period of 6 weeks in September, October. I think we're planning to start on September the 23rd. So we haven't yet publicised it, but this is a sort of a pre-glimpse of what's coming up. So that's a really interesting thing to attend, and it's online, so it's quite straightforward to join. And I certainly found it really interesting and useful.
Yeah, we'll include a link if anybody would like more information. Once that is announced, we can include a link to our mailing list. We'll announce that. So thank you, Katia and Mark, for joining us this week. Just a reminder that you can follow us on all social media at Humanism Now Pod. And if you would like to help support the podcast, we are now live on Patreon. Any support will be much appreciated. Or you can simply rate, review the podcast, or share it with anyone else you think might be interested. We're always open to hear from you for new questions, topics, or guest ideas. So please do contact us. All the links will be in the show notes. But thank you for joining us this week on Humanism Now.